I found out my wife slept her way up the ladder, using me as a stepping stone. She tried to erase me instead. I erased her career, her pride, her future. The cicadas in Piedmont Park were screaming their summer anthem as I put the finishing touches on my latest painting. Atlanta in early June is relentlessly humid. But in my studio with the windows open, I could at least pretend the sticky air was somehow inspiring. At 29, I was finally preparing for my first legitimate exhibition at a local gallery, a small milestone in my journey as a freelance artist, but one I'd been working toward for years. The two-story craftsman we called home sat just 3 blocks from the park. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours. Or so I thought. Clara, my wife of 4 years, had insisted on this neighborhood, despite the stretch on our finances. "Location matters, Daniel," she'd said with that confident smile that had first captivated me. At 27, Clara was already deputy director of PR at Harrison & Cole, her career trajectory shooting upward, while mine meandered through the unpredictable terrain of the art world. Life had fallen into a comfortable, if imperfect, rhythm. Clara worked long hours, always impeccably dressed, always slightly distracted. Our conversations had grown shorter, our intimacy more scheduled than spontaneous. I'd chalked it up to her demanding job and my preoccupation with the upcoming exhibition. But we had Sophie, our 3-year-old miracle with Clara's dark curls and my curious eyes, who filled our home with laughter and crayon masterpieces I proudly displayed alongside my canvases. "Daddy, look, I made a rainbow dinosaur," Sophie would declare, her little face serious with artistic purpose. In those moments, any distance between Clara and me seemed manageable, temporary. That Wednesday started normally enough. I met Victor Langston, my agent at our usual coffee shop. Victor was 35, polished in that way. Successful people in the arts often are casual clothes that cost more than they should, an air of curated nonchalance. "I've got potentially big news," he said, stirring his Americano. "There's interest from New York, serious interest." "Details, Victor." I pressed, trying to contain my excitement. He smiled, checking his watch. "Let's just say your work is generating the right kind of buzz. The right people are noticing." Before I could ask more, his phone rang. He frowned at the screen, then stood abruptly. "I need to take this. Sorry to cut this short, but we'll talk tomorrow." He placed a 20 on the table and was gone before I could protest, leaving me with questions and an odd feeling in my stomach. I was settling the bill when a stranger approached, middle-aged, wearing a suit that seemed too warm for the day. "Daniel Prescott." He asked, no warmth in his voice. "That's me. You've been served." He handed me a thick envelope. "Good luck." My hands trembled as I opened it. Right there in the cafe, divorce papers. A temporary restraining order. Clara's signature, elegant and familiar, at the bottom of each page. The room seemed to tilt sideways as I read phrases like irreconcilable differences and immediate effect. I called Clara immediately. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. Abandoning my coffee, I rushed to my car and drove home, my mind racing. Sophie. I needed to see Sophie. To understand what the hell was happening, I knew something was wrong the moment I reached our driveway. The locks had been changed. I realized this as my key failed to turn. Clara's Audi was in the garage, the curtains drawn. I pounded on the door, calling her name, my voice growing hoarse. Finally, Clara appeared at the second-floor window, looking down at me with an expression I'd never seen before, detached, almost clinical. "Let the lawyers handle this. Daniel," she said, her voice carrying across the yard where neighbors were now watching. Then she disappeared from view. I was still reeling when the police cruiser pulled up. The officer was apologetic, but firm. "Sir, we've received a report that you're violating a restraining order. I need you to leave the premises immediately." "This is my home," I protested, my voice breaking. "My daughter is in there." "I understand, sir, but the order is clear. This is just a warning, but if you don't leave now, I'll have to take you in." It hit me. Then Clara had timed this perfectly. The service of papers, the police call, all of it, orchestrated like a PR campaign. I left humiliated, watching my home shrink in the rearview mirror. I drove to my brother Richard's place in a daze. Richard, 5 years my senior and infinitely more practical as a construction project manager, listened to my story with growing concern, pouring me a whiskey I didn't want but desperately needed. "If you think Clara just wants a clean break, you're kidding yourself," Richard said, refilling my glass. "I've seen this movie before with my buddy Dave. His ex-wife took everything, including his dignity. He disappeared into his office and returned with a worn business card. Margaret Holloway. He said, handing it to me. She's not cheap, but if you want to keep your daughter in your life, you need to call her tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I spread the divorce papers across Richard's guest room bed, reading every line by the dim light of a bedside lamp. And there it was. Clara was demanding all of my artwork, my studio equipment, everything I'd created. The very same works she'd dismissed as hobby pieces that would never sell for real money. I stared at the clause stating, "All artistic works shall remain with the plaintiff." A chill ran down my spine. Clara had never cared about my art unless she knew something I didn't. But what? And why was everything so perfectly arranged? I understood then that tomorrow, when I walked into Margaret Holloway's office, I wouldn't just be seeking a lawyer. I'd be looking for a way to survive a trap that Clara had been setting for a very long time. The address on Richard's worn business card led me to a Victorian house near Piedmont Park the following morning. A modest brass plaque beside the door read, "Law Offices of Margaret Holloway." No flashy billboards, no promises of destroying the opposition, just that simple statement of purpose. I was greeted by a young woman with auburn hair and intelligent eyes, Emily Farnsworth. She introduced herself, extending her hand. "Ms. Holloway is expecting you." She led me through the converted home, now a time capsule of legal tradition. Shelves of leather-bound law books, dark wood paneling, and the faint scent of lemon polish. The air conditioning was working overtime against the June heat, making the sweet tea on a side table look particularly inviting. Margaret Holloway wasn't what I expected. At 65, she was petite, almost fragile-looking, with silver hair cut in a precise bob. But her eyes, pale blue and utterly unforgiving, suggested she'd seen every form of human deception and had long ago stopped being surprised by it. "Mr. Prescott," she said, not rising from behind an imposing mahogany desk. "Please sit." I told her everything. The ambushed divorce papers, the restraining order, being locked out of my own home, separated from Sophie. As I spoke, my voice cracked with anger and bewilderment. Margaret Holloway simply watched, her expression unchanged occasionally, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Emotions don't win legal wars, Mr. Prescott," she said, a hint of a southern drawl in her voice. "They might feel righteous, but they're tactically useless." She studied me for an uncomfortable moment. "Are you absolutely certain there's nothing in your past she can use against you? No violence, no affairs, no questionable behavior around your daughter?" "Never," I said firmly. "I've never laid a hand on Clara. Never cheated. Sophie is my world." "What about money troubles? Gambling, substance abuse?" "None. I manage my commissions carefully. We've lived within our means." Margaret tapped her pen against the desk. "I don't take every case that walks through my door. Mr. Prescott, I'm semi-retired to be frank, but Clara Delgado." She pronounced my wife's maiden name with a peculiar emphasis. "She interests me." She instructed me to bring all financial records, legal documents, and communications with Clara for our next meeting. "Tomorrow, same time. My fee is $400 an hour with a $10,000 retainer. Emily will handle the paperwork." As she showed me to the door, Margaret added, "If she's gone this far already, I guarantee Clara isn't stopping here. This is just her opening move." In the hallway, Emily touched my arm lightly. "I know it doesn't count for much right now, but I believe you're innocent in all this," she said quietly. Her eyes held something I desperately needed: simple human kindness. "It counts," I managed to say, "more than you know." That evening, I spread our financial records across Richard's dining table. My brother had given me space, heading out to a job site after ensuring I had eaten something. The documents told a story I hadn't been paying attention to. 2 months ago, Clara had transferred $50,000 from our joint account to her personal account. The transaction description read, "Emergency Fund," something we'd never discussed. It was an enormous sum, nearly all our liquid savings. Digging deeper into our cloud storage, I found emails I'd never seen correspondence between Clara and Victor from April. They referenced ensuring assets aren't compromised and securing the inventory before proceeding. The language was vague, businesslike, but in light of recent events chillingly clear. Victor, my friend, my agent, the man who'd represented my work for 3 years, who'd had dinner at our home, who'd brought Sophie stuffed animals from his travels. Had he been part of this all along? Just before midnight, as I was organizing everything for tomorrow's meeting, an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line, no signature, just a single sentence. If you want to know why she needs the studio and paintings, ask Victor about his meeting in New York last month. I sat frozen before the screen, staring at those words. New York. Victor had never mentioned any New York trip to me. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. How many betrayals was I facing, and who was watching this dirty game from the shadows, feeding me these breadcrumbs of information? More importantly, what did Clara know about my work that I didn't? What had Victor been doing behind my back? The questions swirled in my mind, keeping sleep at bay, as the night stretched endlessly before me. I arrived at Margaret's office the next morning with 2 cardboard boxes of documents, financial statements, art contracts, tax returns, everything I could think of that might help. My sleepless night had left me exhausted, but focused anger providing clarity. I hadn't felt since receiving those divorce papers. Margaret methodically examined each document while Emily took notes on her laptop. The older woman paid particular attention to my art contracts, reading the fine print with a magnifying glass, despite her designer reading glasses. These intellectual property clauses are interesting, she murmured, setting aside a gallery agreement. Very specific about ownership rights. Emily occasionally glanced at me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. I wondered what she thought of my situation. Just another deluded husband blindsided by betrayal, or something more complex? Tell me about Victor Langston, Margaret said, suddenly looking up from the papers. What exactly is your relationship with him? He's my agent, has been for 3 years. I hesitated. I thought he was my friend. And his connection to Clara? They've met at gallery openings, dinner parties, normal social interaction. Margaret raised an eyebrow. I don't believe in coincidences when people like Victor appear at precisely the right moment. In my experience, Mr. Prescott's convenient timing usually indicates careful planning. She turned to Emily. I need you to compile a detailed dossier on Clara Delgado Prescott, her career trajectory, social connections, private assets. And I want everything you can find on Victor Langston, work history, recent deals, any connection to Clara, beyond what Mr. Prescott knows. Emily nodded, already typing. As for you, Margaret said, turning back to me, I need a comprehensive list of everyone connected to your marriage, friends, family, colleagues who might have information or motives we don't yet understand. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. Every betrayal leaves traces, Mr. Prescott. Our job is to find them before we're backed into a corner. By late afternoon, Emily had uncovered the first red flags. Clara's career progress at Harrison & Cole is remarkable. She explained, spreading printouts across the conference table. 5 years ago, she was an intern. Now she's deputy director of PR. That kind of advancement usually takes a decade. Emily pulled up Clara's social media accounts on her tablet. Look at these charity galas, industry events, networking parties. She's been building a public persona very carefully. She paused. But there's something odd. In the past year, there are 0 photos of you or Sophie in any of her public profiles. What are you saying? She's been erasing her family from her public image for at least a year. This wasn't a sudden decision. The revelation hit like a physical blow. While I'd been painting and caring for Sophie, Clara had been systematically removing us from her life narrative. There's more. Emily continued. Victor Langston was in New York exactly 1 month ago, a 3-day trip. She slid a printout toward me. Clara was there too, supposedly for a Harrison & Cole client meeting. My mouth went dry. They were together. They both checked into the Grand Lexington, though not explicitly as traveling companions. But the timing, I felt sick. I need to call him. Margaret nodded permission, and I stepped into the hallway. Phone in hand, Victor answered on the second ring. Daniel, how are you holding up? This divorce situation is just terrible. His concern sounded genuine, which only made it worse. "I'm managing," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Actually, I had a question about some business matters. Were you in New York recently?" A barely perceptible pause. "New York. Oh, just routine meetings with potential clients. Anyone I know? No one significant," he said quickly, "just exploring possibilities." I ended the call shortly after a bitter taste in my mouth. Friends don't need to hide routine business trips. When I returned, Margaret was speaking with a newcomer, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with calloused hands and shrewd eyes. "Daniel, this is Samuel Booker. He owns a cleaning service that maintains corporate offices throughout Atlanta. He's also been my information specialist for 20 years. Samuel's handshake was firm. "Mrs. Holloway says you're in a tight spot." Margaret explained, "Samuel is going to place some monitoring devices in the Harrison and Cole offices and Victor's studio." "Is that legal?" I asked. Margaret smiled thinly. "We don't find justice in law books. Daniel, we find it in hidden truths." She turned to Samuel. "Focus on Clara's office, her boss's space, and any conference rooms they might use for Victor's studio. I want eyes and ears everywhere." The office emptied as evening fell, but Emily and I remained sifting through documents and theories. Around midnight, she brought fresh coffee and sat beside me. "My father was betrayed like this," she said quietly. "His business partner and his wife, a classic story. I was 14. Watching him rebuild his life showed me what resilience really means." "How did he manage?" "He focused on what mattered most, me and my brother, and let everything else go. Eventually, he found happiness again." She looked at me intently. "You will too." "All I can think about is Sophie." I admitted, "She must be so confused." Emily's hand covered mine briefly. "You'll get her back. I believe that." It was the first time since this nightmare began that I felt something beyond anger or fear, a flicker of hope, tenuous but real. I was no longer completely alone in this fight. As I was preparing to leave, Margaret's phone rang. She answered, listened briefly, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Samuel just called with news. There's something you need to see first thing tomorrow." Her brow furrowed in a way that made my heart race. What could possibly make someone as unflappable as Margaret Holloway look concerned? I arrived at Margaret's office early the next morning, the weight of her cryptic words hanging over me. Samuel Booker was already there, setting up a laptop on the conference table. His expression was grim. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. Margaret and Emily entered, closing the door behind them. The air in the room felt heavy. Samuel's surveillance captured some illuminating footage. Margaret explained, nodding for him to proceed. The first video showed Clara entering an office with Benjamin Crawford, executive director, on the door. I recognized the man, tall, silver-haired, around 50. I'd met him at company functions. What happened next made my stomach turn. After a brief conversation, Benjamin pulled Clara into an embrace that quickly became something far beyond professional. She responded eagerly. Familiarly, Samuel changed to another file. This was taken outside the Piedmont Hotel 2 weeks ago. The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m. Clara and Benjamin emerged together, his hand possessively on the small of her back as they walked to a waiting car. I clenched my fists so hard my nails cut into my palms. Another betrayal. Another knife in my back. "There's more," Samuel said quietly, switching to footage from Victor's studio. Multiple clips showed Clara visiting at odd hours, often staying late into the evening. But the most damning evidence came from an audio recording. "We need to keep the New York deal quiet until everything's finalized," Clara's voice unmistakable. "The paperwork is bulletproof," Victor replied. "Once the divorce is settled and you have ownership of the paintings, we can announce the sale. No one will question it. And the gallery is still offering the full amount, $195,000 tax-free, if we structure it right." I felt the blood drain from my face. Nearly $200,000 for my work. Work that Clara had consistently dismissed as unprofitable. Margaret watched me carefully. "They planned to wait until after the divorce, when Clara would own your paintings, according to the settlement she demanded. Then they'd sell them and split the proceeds. You would never have known. How long have they been planning this?" My voice sounded strange, distant. Based on the evidence, Emily said gently. At least 6 months, maybe longer. The realization crushed whatever remnants of my old life I'd been clinging to. Clara's betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated, cold-blooded theft. And Victor, my supposed friend and advocate, had been part of it from the beginning. I stood up abruptly, needing to move to breathe. I trusted them, both of them. Emily came to stand beside me at the window. You can't change what happened, but you can decide how this game ends. From behind us, Margaret's voice was steel. Now is the time to turn pain into a weapon. Over the next 2 days, we crafted our counter-strategy. Margaret arranged a meeting with Thomas Radcliffe, Clara's attorney from the prestigious firm of Baxter, Whitmore and Reed. Let me do the talking, Margaret instructed. Your job is to remain composed no matter what you see or hear. Can you do that? I nodded. I'll manage. Samuel continued gathering intelligence, focusing now on finding pressure points within the law firm itself. Meanwhile, Margaret drilled me on maintaining a neutral expression, controlling my breathing and projecting quiet confidence rather than anger. Anger makes you predictable, she explained. We need you inscrutable. One evening, after hours of preparation, Emily and I found ourselves alone in the office. The conversation drifted to lighter topics: films, books, music, a brief respite from the ugliness we'd been immersed in. Tell me about Sophie, she asked, suddenly her voice soft. The question caught me off guard, but I found myself smiling. For the first time in days, I told her about Sophie's obsession with dinosaurs, how she insisted on roaring good morning to me every day, her serious little face when she concentrated on her drawings. She sounds wonderful, Emily said, watching me intently. She's everything, I replied, my voice catching. I can't lose her. Emily reached over and took my hand. You won't. You'll get your daughter back, I believe that. Her touch, warm and reassuring, anchored me in that moment. In the midst of destruction, something new was tentatively taking form. Not romance, not yet, but connection, trust, possibility. The night before our meeting with Thomas Radcliffe, I received another anonymous email. If you think it's just Victor and Benjamin, you don't understand Clara yet. Ask Margaret about Gerald Whitmore. I forwarded it to Margaret, immediately calling her cell. Gerald Whitmore. I asked when she answered, Who is he? I could hear the smile in her voice. A senior partner at Baxter, Whitmore and Reed. Focus on tomorrow. Daniel, I have an ace I'm saving for the right moment. That evening, standing before the mirror in Richard's guest bathroom, I adjusted my tie one of my brothers borrowed for tomorrow's meeting. The man staring back at me was different from the dreamy artist of a week ago. This man had been cornered, wounded, but was ready to fight back. I thought of Clara, of her cold calculation, her betrayal of our family. Tomorrow I'd be face to face with her again. You'll see, I whispered to my reflection. The prey you thought would be so easy to devour has sharper teeth than you imagined. The morning of our meeting, we gathered in Margaret's office for final preparations. The evidence was arranged in precise order: photographs, audio files, financial records. Each piece a bullet aimed at Clara's carefully constructed facade. Remember, Margaret said, as Emily organized the documents into a sleek leather portfolio. Our goal isn't just to win, it's to leave no room for negotiation. Samuel arrived with fresh intel. Clara used her company credit card for 3 business trips that coincided with Crawford's travel schedule. He laid out the expense reports. That's corporate fraud. Harrison and Cole takes that seriously. Margaret nodded approvingly. Excellent. This gives us leverage beyond the divorce proceedings. As we prepared to leave, Margaret placed a hand on my shoulder. You just need to stay silent and observe. The person who talks more loses. Her eyes held mine. Can you do that even when provoked? Yes, I promised, feeling a calm certainty I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. The offices of Baxter, Whitmore and Reed occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. The receptionist led us to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thomas Radcliffe was already seated at the polished mahogany table, a stack of documents before him. Clara sat beside him wearing a form-fitting charcoal dress that I recognized, one I'd complimented many times. Her expression when she saw me was confident, almost smug. Neither of them stood as we entered. Mrs. Holloway. Radcliffe began, his voice dripping with condescension. I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. Our final proposal is before you. I believe you'll find it generous given the circumstances. Margaret didn't even glance at the documents. Instead, she sat down, placed her portfolio on the table, and looked directly at Clara. Before we discuss your proposal, I think we should clarify who actually destroyed this marriage. She withdrew a photograph and slid it across the table. Clara and Benjamin Crawford in a passionate embrace, Clara's face drained of color. Radcliffe picked up the photo, his expression shifting from arrogance to concern. This is irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. He stammered, Is it? Margaret's voice was silky. Adultery still matters in Georgia courts, especially when combined with conspiracy to defraud. She nodded to Emily, who produced a small speaker. The recording of Clara and Victor discussing the New York art deal filled the room. Clara's own voice condemning her. Once the divorce is settled and I have ownership of the paintings. I watched Clara's hands tighten on the edge of the table, her knuckles white. $195,000. Margaret stated when the recording ended. That's what Mr. Prescott's art is actually worth, art that Mrs. Prescott repeatedly denigrated while secretly planning to steal. That's not just unethical, it's criminal conspiracy. Radcliffe attempted damage control. These recordings are likely inadmissible. In court, perhaps, Margaret interrupted, but we're not in court yet, are we? And the court of public opinion has no rules of evidence. She turned to Clara. If this goes to trial, you won't just lose the divorce case. You'll face criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. Is that what you want, Clara? Your name in the papers. Your reputation destroyed. Clara finally spoke, her voice shaking. You're bluffing. You have nothing. Are we? Margaret reached into her portfolio once more and withdrew another photograph. This one showed Clara with Gerald Whitmore, a senior partner at the very law firm, representing her in an intimate setting at an upscale resort. I've already sent copies to the managing partners. Margaret said calmly, I'm waiting to hear back. Thomas Radcliffe looked physically ill. Mrs. Holloway, surely we can resolve this without, here are our terms. Margaret cut in. Mrs. Prescott withdraws all claims to Mr. Prescott's artwork studio equipment and intellectual property. Mr. Prescott receives full custody of Sophie. Mrs. Prescott covers all legal expenses incurred. She paused, eyes fixed on Radcliffe. Additionally, Baxter, Whitmore, and Reed will pay a confidentiality fee of $50,000 for us to keep Mr. Whitmore's indiscretions private. Clara started to protest, but Radcliffe placed a warning hand on her arm, leaning in to whisper urgently in her ear. Whatever he said drained the last of the fight from her. She nodded once defeated. We need 24 hours to draft the agreement. Radcliffe said, his voice hollow. You have 12. Margaret replied. Gathering her materials, I stood looking directly at Clara for the first time. The woman I'd loved, the mother of my child, now revealed as a stranger. Thank you for teaching me about trust. Clara, I said quietly. She couldn't meet my eyes. Tears streaked her makeup, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation, of a predator caught in its own trap. Under the table, Emily gently squeezed my hand, a silent reminder to maintain composure until we were safely away. The three of us walked out without another word, our footsteps echoing in the silence we'd created. No one spoke until we reached the elevator. Well done, Margaret said simply as the doors closed. Is it really over? I asked, hardly daring to believe it. The divorce, yes. The rest. We'll see. There was something in her tone that suggested unfinished business. As we left the building, I glanced back at the conference room doors that had just closed behind us. Behind them lay the wreckage that Clara would have to live with for the rest of her life. But deep down, I still had one unanswered question. Margaret hadn't played all her cards. What else did she know that I didn't? The dominoes began falling almost immediately after our meeting at Baxter, Whitmore, and Reed. Within a week, the settlement was signed, notarized, and filed with the court. But that was just the beginning. I was painting in my newly reclaimed studio when an email arrived from someone I didn't recognize, a mid-level employee at Harrison & Cole. The subject line simply read, "Justice." Clara was fired this morning. Corporate security escorted her out. Everyone knows she misused company funds to facilitate her affair with Crawford. He's been suspended pending a full investigation. She couldn't even look people in the eye while cleaning out her desk. Nobody's talking to her. We all know what she did to you. I sat back, paintbrush still in hand, unsure how to feel. The revenge I'd craved now tasted different. Not sweet, not bitter, just final. The art world is smaller than most people realize. Word travels fast, especially scandalous word. Samuel called 3 days later. "Thought you'd want to know," he said in his gruff voice. That New York gallery pulled their contract with Victor. Seems they don't appreciate being part of a fraud scheme. Emily confirmed it the next day with additional details. He's been blacklisted by every reputable gallery in Atlanta. Nobody will work with him. She showed me Victor's latest social media post. He was selling his studio equipment at fire sale prices. Rumor is he's drowning in debt, Samuel added when he stopped by with more news. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. The collapse of Baxter Whitmore and Reed's reputation was more gradual, but equally satisfying. Gerald Whitmore was forced to resign after major shareholders expressed concern about ethical lapses in judgment. Thomas Radcliffe was quietly let go. His mishandling of my case cited as the official reason Margaret received her confidentiality payment, substantially more than the $50,000 she'd initially demanded. "Enough to renovate my office," she said with a rare smile. "I've been wanting new bookshelves for years." 2 weeks after the settlement, I moved back into our house, my house now. The locks had been changed yet again, this time by my locksmith. I walked through each room, reclaiming the space, washing away Clara's lingering presence with fresh paint and rearranged furniture. Most importantly, Sophie came home. The court granted me full custody with Clara, allowed supervised visitation, twice monthly visits she rarely bothered to keep. "Daddy, can I have my dinosaurs back in my room?" Sophie asked on her first night home. I had kept every toy, every stuffed animal, exactly as she'd left them. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything's just as you remember." The New York gallery that had planned to buy my work through Victor now approached me directly. Their offer was even better. $225 for the collection Clara had tried to steal, plus a 2-year exclusive contract for future works. This time, every dollar would be mine. Life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings with Sophie painting while she napped. Evenings filled with bedtime stories and quiet reflection. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into something useful. Wisdom, perspective, strength. Emily became a regular visitor. Initially, she came with legal paperwork or updates about the case, but soon the pretext fell away. She simply came because we enjoyed each other's company. She brought books for Sophie, coffee for me, and a warmth that had been missing from my home for longer than I cared to admit. One autumn afternoon, the three of us walked through Piedmont Park, watching the leaves turn gold and crimson. Sophie ran ahead, chasing squirrels with the boundless energy of a 3-year-old. I reached for Emily's hand, interlacing our fingers. "Thank you," I said softly, "for believing in me from the beginning." She smiled, her eyes reflecting something tender and hopeful. "I saw the truth in you, Daniel, even when you couldn't see it yourself." From her office overlooking the park, Margaret watched our progress with satisfaction. Later that evening, she received a call from Samuel. "I guess that wraps things up," he said. Margaret chuckled softly. "No, Samuel. For people like Clara, the real punishment is just beginning, having to live forever with indelible shame." 2 days later, a video appeared on social media, intimate footage of Clara and Gerald Whitmore, that left nothing to the imagination. Nobody knew the source, though rumors suggested it came from an anonymous account created specifically for that purpose. The fallout was swift and merciless. Clara became toxic, unemployable, a cautionary tale in corporate circles. That evening, I received one final anonymous message. "I told you she deserved more than she got. Enjoy your freedom. Daniel." I looked at the screen, a small smile playing at my lips. "Thank you, mystery friend." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood on the freshly painted deck of my home, watching the sunset with Emily beside me and Sophie perched on my shoulders. The lawn needed mowing, the garden needed weeding. But these were normal, everyday challenges, the kind I welcomed. Life is full of betrayers, I thought, but with the right allies and enough courage, I won't fall again. Sophie's laughter rang out clear and bright in the evening air, washing away the last echoes of painful memories. Miles away in her immaculate office, Margaret Holloway made a final note in her casebook. Prescott Matter concluded, ready for the next game. She closed the file with a satisfied smile, knowing that somewhere in Atlanta, Clara Delgado was discovering that some mistakes can never be erased, only endured. As for me, I had paintings to create, a daughter to raise, and for the first time in years, a future unmarred by deception. I was ready.